Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, on this lovely Saturday morning. I'm Jesse Trace. I'm a farmer, land steward. My family grows avocados here in Morro Bay. But I'm also a naturalist, amateur naturalist, and a quirkophile, which we're gonna learn in a minute what that is. Some of the early birds already know. But yeah, thanks for coming. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to learn about oaks, what they are, where you can find them, what their function is in the ecosystem. What are the ones we have in California? I put it up on this cork background, so also an oak, in case you didn't know. What is ethnobotany? You may have heard that word. What is our relationship to oaks and our history, how they've been used in the past. Alanoculture, that's a mouthful. We'll learn about that word. Staple crops and acorn nutrition, so are they good for you or not? And some modern balanocultures and their cuisines. And then finally, can we put the oaks back? Because over time we've lost a lot of trees, and saving the forest for the trees. So let's begin. So what is an oak? Does anyone want to give it a shot?
Tree.
Tree, okay.
Good looking tree.
A good looking tree. Any other guesses?
A large tree.
A large tree, yeah. Well, so an oak is a woody plant in the genus Quercus. And so when I say quirkophile, I'm referring to the genus Quercus. For the scientific classification, you have Quercus, which is the genus, and then you have the species, and that's the different kind of oak it is. But generally they look like that, especially in California. And this, in fact, is from Portugal, but we have a very similar climate there. Yeah, so the oak, or Quercus, started 56 million years ago from one original species, and then has branched out over time. And now there are 435 species all over the world. So, you know, we have a lot in California, but they're all over the northern hemisphere and down into the tropics, and you'll see in a second. And it's a keystone species. What does that mean? Basically, it's a species that's really important in an ecosystem, and a lot of insects and plants and fungi call it home and need it to survive. And they can live a very long time. They can live up to 1,000 years. So they'll be around long after we're gone. What is this? Well, this is the scientific classification. So there's kings play chess on furry green stumps. Kingdom, phylum, order, class, family, genus, species. That's the scientific classification. We can organize everything, all life on Earth, into that. But what we're going to focus on is family, genus, and species. So the oak is in the Fagaceae family. So the chestnut is also in the oak family. Beeches, not the ones you lay on next to the coast, but Beeches. It's another tree. And so the family is Fagaceae, the genus is Quercus, quirkophile, and the species are all the different kinds. So coast live oak is Quercus agrifolia. But really there are, the oaks are broken down into two subgenera, so Quercus and Cerus. But really what we want to focus on are the sections and the subsections. So we have Cyclobalanopsis, which is the cyclecup oaks that are in Asia. We have the Lobate, which are the red oaks. So we have 8 different kind of groups that we group our oaks into. We have the white oaks, which are Quercus quercus, not to make it more confusing. But in the end, there are 435 species and basically 8 different groups that we put our oaks into. And this is what they look like. So they're in the northern hemisphere, mostly. They creep down into the tropics, especially here. There are even some in Colombia. But probably what most people are familiar with are the white oaks, right? Oh, it's a white oak or it's a red oak. Well, the white oak is the Quercus section. So this is the light blue, or the dark blue outline. And that's kind of the most common one around the world. But we also have Lobate, Verentes, so all different sections all over the planet. So it's a very adaptable plant that has really thrived in the north. Come on in, there's plenty of room up front. We have 3 more seats here.
We have more chairs here.
There's a chair over there as well. Make yourselves at home. I was just explaining what oaks are. Quercus. Thanks for counting.
Is that like where cork comes from?
That is where the word cork comes from. Yes, and I didn't explore the etymology in this talk, but yeah, Quercus and cork are the of the same.
So the cork
root.
oak, what is it most similar to?
Cork oak is a Mediterranean climate, so it's similar to the coast live oak here. And in fact, they're all over San Luis Obispo. There's even one 2 doors down over there,
Oh,
big
really?
beautiful cork oak. Yeah, and we have an example. My card in there is sitting in a little cork oak heart-shaped container that you can check out when we're done with this talk. So you just missed this right here. This basically shows that there are 8 different groups of oaks, the sections. And so we have the white oaks and the red oaks. And this is kind of where they are on the planet and the different groups. And the United States is not number 1, but it's top 3 in oak diversity. So unfortunately, China's better than us. Or maybe fortunately. But the king of oak diversity is Mexico. They have 164 species of oaks. So that they are really, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to conserve all of these species. Yeah. So where can you find oaks? Well, probably in your garden, showing up all the time. They are, as you saw on that map, they're all over the North Hemisphere. They're in the tropics, so they are happy in tons of different places. Here's a beautiful ecosystem of a deciduous oak forest, the red flush. But this is something that we're more familiar with seeing. This is an oak woodland in a Mediterranean climate. They're in pine forests, they're in tropical, subtropical forests, they're in savanna, so they're just all spread out all over the biomes. And this is a picture of the tallest oak in the world. It's over 230 feet tall, and it's in Costa Rica. I spent 5 years there, I had no idea. I would have liked to visit it, but maybe
What do they
another
name it?
time. What's
Is there a
that?
name? Locals name?
It's Quercus bumbeloides. It's not the best name, but they call it the grandfather oak. I wonder if the bumble has anything to do with it being a grandfather. I don't know. But yeah, so oaks are adapted to all different kinds of ecosystems and climates, and they're keystone species, like I said earlier. So so they just are a harbor for life. In California, there's 300 terrestrial vertebrate species, 1,100 native vascular plants, 370 fungal species, and 5,000 arthropods, insects. So the oak tree is really the mothership of a lot of life here. And so when we talk about conservation, of oak conservation, we're also talking about all these species. woodpeckers, owls, hawks, deer, you name it. All different kinds of creatures eat them. So we actually have more than 20 species, but just more or less we have 20 because it starts to get complicated when they hybridize. So there's about 20 species of oaks in California and about 10 of them are trees. But if you do a quick search on Calscape, you can see all the different examples we have. Interior live, Tamalpais, Muller, so there's a ton. But I'm just gonna give you the short, the abridged version so that you can digest this meal. And then if you wanna learn more, there's certainly more to learn. What's the difference between a tree or a shrub? Anyone?
A shrub is less than 5 meters tall.
Brownie points. Yeah, that's it. You know, basically a tree is over 15 feet tall, and a shrub is under 15 feet tall, and a shrub sprouts from the ground, and a tree sprouts from the trunk above the ground. But sometimes what they'll do is they'll turn a tree into a shrub, or they'll turn a shrub into a tree. They'll prune the shrub up to look like a tree, vice versa. But this is just to get a sense, but really the most important thing is height. So if it's if it's way over your head, then it's probably a tree. If it's under your chin, then it's probably a shrub.
So when it's an oak and it falls down, and all the other trees grow from it,
Yeah.
is that a shrub or a tree?
Yeah. The question is, does it make a noise?
Barely,
Yeah.
because the ground underneath an oak is usually pretty soft.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, because
Maintained.
it's really a fertile ground, and nice and soft and quiet. So California oaks, there's about 20 species. This is a canyon live oak. We don't have too many around here, not in Morro Bay.
Right.
But they're up in the hills, in the canyons, generally at higher elevation. Just a beautiful tree on a place I visited. So I mentioned earlier, there are 8 sections, right? That's kind of how to make sense of the oak world. Well, in California we have 3 of them. So we've got the white oaks, we've got the red oaks, and we've got the golden oaks. So what's the difference? Well, so the white oak, which I'll show you later, I brought a bunch of acorns for you all to look at, to understand. The white oak has lobed leaves, right? So that's how you can tell it has these rounded edges, and it has, the acorn cap is warty, so it's got like little bumps on it. And one example of that is the valley oak, which all of you have been through Paso Robles before, probably. And it's also deciduous, just this specific one. But yeah, Paso Robles, in fact, means in Spanish the pass of the deciduous oaks. For those that didn't know, so we have the white oaks, which is section Quercus. We have the red oaks, which is section Lobate, and one example of that is the coast live oak. So the coast live oak, or the red oak, excuse me, they have little teeth at the edges of their leaves, and so if you ever walk through an area, you'll get all scratched up. That is indicative of the red oaks, and also you can see on their caps they're scaly, so they look like little alligator or lizard skin or something like that. And finally we have the golden oaks. The canyon live oak is a golden oak. Another name for it is the intermediate oak. But the example I put here is the island oak, which we're going to see in a second where it's originally from. But we have 3 big, beautiful trees right around this building. So we can go check them out later if you want. You might even be able to see just from right there. And the way you can tell what the golden oaks are, or the protobalanus section, is they have furry leaves, and they have and they have really round saucer-like caps. So those are the three sections that we have in California. And now I'm just going to go through a couple oak species, and you can kind of get a sense of what they look like and where they live. So the coast live oak, this is the distribution. So they're all over the coast, but they're not at all in the Sierras, right? So that's kind of where they stop. They'll reach in a little bit into the Central Valley. That's the red oak section. They really like the fog. The blue oak, they're pretty widespread, but they don't like the coast. They're on the margins of the Central Valley bathtub, they like to say. They're kind of a lower elevation, but they're on the foothills of the Sierras and the foothills of the coastal range. That is the white oak section. The black oak, pretty widespread all the way down south, all the way up north. Again, don't really like the coast. You tend to see them at higher elevations. There's one patch of them on the 46 if you ever drive by, and you see a beautiful yellow and red hillside in the fall. That's from these black oaks. It's the closest thing to the eastern style oaks. The eastern oaks from deciduous ecosystems.
Is
back
it
east.
colder up there in that?
It's
that-
colder.
This is my throat.
Yeah. Salud. Yeah, it's a little colder, a little wetter up there, so it's kind of different from our mild coastal climate. The valley oak, those are found in the valleys and the valley bottoms. They like, this winter, you've probably seen some of them in standing water. That's where they like to be. We had a really wild winter. That's why we all missed the first talk. Yeah, you find them pretty far up north, but they kind of stop at the end of the Central Valley, and they don't really go up into the redwoods. And they go down to about Los Angeles. That's the white oak section. They're deciduous. The canyon live oak, those are all over, and interestingly, there's a patch of them way out in the desert right here, which is kind of bizarre, in the Chocolate Mountains. Not sure how they got there, but there's a long history of trade before colonization and settlement in California, so that is one possibility that they were traded and planted. They like higher elevation. They don't really like the coast so much. Not too many around us, but quite a bit in Big Sur.
Not to interrupt, I just wanted
Go
to
ahead.
say one thing.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about like Chocolate Mountains.
Yeah.
So there's also there's areas of native palm trees in those canyons. It's
Yeah.
kind of like this island of diversity in the desert
Right.
there, which is, I didn't know there was oak trees there though. That's really cool.
Yeah, there's a bunch of interesting oak species that are adapted to deserts. There's some in the Joshua tree, for example. Go ahead.
Is it in areas of water out in the desert or around, what would you call it?
Yeah. Oasis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The watershed must be amazing, right? In that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, oaks are water-loving species, which is kind of weird because you see them in a totally dry landscape, and but yeah, they'll reach they're called there's a specific name, but basically they can reach their roots way down into the groundwater. So yeah, wherever there's water, there are oak trees. John?
Which
Yeah.
one of the groups do the pygmy oaks in Elfin Forest fall into?
That's the coast live oak, so that's the
Okay.
red oak section. And they're just they kind of have poor sandy soil, salty air. They don't really grow that big, but you see on clay soil and kind of further away from the salty aquifer, they do a lot better. So they're tough, so they'll stick it out, but they just don't get very tall. And then you go, is that a shrub or a tree?
It's a tree.
It's a tree. So yeah, canyon live oak. We were talking a little bit earlier about the Oregon white oak, or the Gary's oak. That's further north. That's kind of like the valley oak of the north, although it's kind of a little higher up in elevation. That's the white oak section, and it's deciduous. And the interior live oak is like the coast live oak of the interior. So it's not adapted to the coastal fog, but it's a live oak, and it's also in the red oak group. The Engelmann oak, or the Mesa oak, is down in San Diego and Los Angeles basin. So it's just a unique species that's adapted to that really dry, mild climate there. Where the valley oaks end, this is the one that takes its place. And the island oak, the beautiful oaks around our lovely library here, is the rarest of all the oaks of California, because it's found only on the Channel Islands. That's why it's called the island oak. It is an intermediate oak, or a golden oak, and it has big, beautiful acorns, and it's well adapted to coastal fog. So when we're thinking about planting trees for eating that can withstand the coastal fog and mild climate, because all acorns are edible, by the way. You just have to leach them, some of them, and some you don't. This is a great candidate. Now, oaks and humans. So, that was a little taste of the scientific classification of oaks and what we have in California. And oaks and acorns have been a part of our human development from the very beginning. Here's an example of Sistine Chapel. There's a nude man. Of course, notice that the acorns on his left look a little like something else. Interestingly enough, the French word for acorn is also the word for penis. So be careful what you say if you speak French. But yeah, there's a really long history of humans and these trees because they have edible acorns. So ethnobotany, what is it? Basically, it's people from a certain region interacting with plants and how they use them for oils, resins, gums, dyes, you name it. So in Southeast Asia, you have rice for food, you have sugarcane as a sweetener, you have ginger as a medicine, bamboo as a structural material. So this relationship, this interplay between humans and their environment and the plants in their environment is ethnobotany. And then Bolano culture is basically a more refined ethnobotany, but referring to certain communities of people that use acorns to consume, so as a foodstuff. And I would argue, actually, that Bolano culture, I would expand it even more, because it's not just the food that we eat. Really, most people don't eat the acorn, but a lot of people have wood oak floors. They have oak cabinets. They, they barbecue with it. So it's much more common than we realize. But it was coined by David Bainbridge, and he's a Western restoration ecologist. And it's a mix between Bolano, which means acorn, and cultura, which means culture in Latin. So here's a little timeline of human acorn use. There's evidence going back almost 1 million years through carbon dating of charred acorn remains. So there's a really long history, pre-human history, of us eating acorns. But I wanted to limit the scope just to kind of the Holocene, as we started to emerge from the landscape, settle down, create societies and civilizations. So the first example of that is the Natufian culture, if you're familiar with them. They were around the Levant in Israel and Lebanon, and they were eating acorns. They're also the first people to try out agriculture. But there are tons of examples. So there's the Lengyel community in the Balkans. This is BCE, so before the Common Era. So that's 7,000 years ago. People were using these tools to crush acorns and eat them. And then the first written example was, of course, came with the first writing, which was during the Bronze Age in Mesopotamia. That's 4,000 years ago. And then by 600 in the Common Era, in the Wei Dynasty, this agricultural text refers to the Quercus mongolica, or the Mongolian oak, as a great nut tree and nut crop. And then finally, there's a long and beautiful history of California native peoples eating acorns. And it started about 5,000 years ago, and was really one of the few communities that used it as a staple food. In a lot of other places it was used as a famine food, but here it was really a huge part of the diet, and we're going to talk about that. So, so let's all jump in our time machine and travel back 13,000 years ago. The Ice Age, which started 20,000 years ago, is finally thawing. And during that cold time, all of the oak species and humans as well, and a lot of other different species retreated into the refugia of the mountains and the deserts in order to find warm climates. And then as the ice started to melt and sea levels rose, humans and
Drawback of being so close to the fire station.
Big cat in the tree.
Right.
There is a chair here, if anyone wants.
Yeah, there's room. There's room. I don't bite. So 13,000 years ago, the glaciers are receding, and oaks and humans are advancing from the refugia, and it's around the same time. This is near the cradle of civilization, where Mesopotamia was, and before that, the Levant is over here, where the Natufians were. So this is in the Middle East, and this region right here, there's a long history of people living among the oak trees. And what William Logan Bryant, who wrote this great book that I recommend you all read if you want to learn more about oaks and our relationship to them, is an alternative theory. And instead of us hunting big game and chasing them into the deserts, the fertile flat deserts of the Fertile Crescent, we instead lived among the oaks and had this staple food, and were able to venture off further down into the bottomlands and come back if we weren't able to, if we didn't have enough food or whatever. And so it's kind of an alternative theory of how we began to develop civilization. And here is a cross section of what that looks like. So this is down where Babylon and Mesopotamia is, and these are our ancestors up here, imagining a world where we would live in structures and worship deities and plant grains. So, what can you make with oaks? Well, it's unbelievable the amount of things that come from them. Ink for the longest time was made from a gall on an oak tree. You know, there's charcoal. This is an image of Çatal Hayuk in southeastern Turkey. It was one of the first settled areas that they were cooking with oak and eating acorns. You know, So was really an incredibly important tool for us to continue to develop and specialize our skills. And so its importance cannot be understated in the human story. And there's a lot of mythology. I just picked some of the Western stories, but you know, the Greeks, the Romans, the Celts, they all have a important god that was a god of lightning, the god of death, and also was related to an oak tree, which is kind of interesting. Often what would happen is that an oak tree in an area, they're full of water because they're hydrophilic. That's the word I was thinking of. And they're out in a big valley. A storm will come by, and it'll get struck by lightning. And that's, I think, why Zeus was the god of lightning, and his most important tree was an oak tree. But it's really deep in our culture, the mythology of the oaks. 7,000 BCE, so 9,000 years ago, there's evidence of the first settled area of acorn as a foodstuff. So it's been around for a very long time. These are some of the text written in cuneiform that mentioned acorns as a food source. In ancient and classical Greece, it was considered very important. So 2,800 years ago, Hesiod said that honest people do not suffer from famine, since the gods gave them abundant subsistence, acorn-bearing oaks, honey, and sheep. And then by 300 BCE, they were already cataloging the different species, which ones were the good ones, the bad ones, what they were used for. So it's a very important use, very important plant in our repertoire. And then in the Middle Age and up to now, acorns have been used for brewing when there wasn't enough barley. They were used as tribute when they didn't have money. They were fed to pigs. So there's really a long history of using them. But as time has gone on, acorns have taken on a more and more stigmatized role as a food. That's a famine food. That's a food of the peasants, of the poor, and now in the 20th century, it was considered a food of the poor, and so it's just continued to fall out of favor. And then, of course, the native Californians, as I mentioned earlier, when the first European settlers arrived and explorers, they happened upon a park-like space that was managed through fire, and we were really walking through orchards of acorns, and it's something that we can't understate. It was 50% of their diet, and we'll take a look at one of their staple meals in a minute.
So Jesse,
Yes.
I read that oak woodlands also were a source of territorial disputes because there's some variability in the way they actually taste, and
Right.
the ones that taste the best were the ones that are the most coveted.
Right.
Is that correct?
Oh yeah, totally. It's been a long story of fighting over resources.
I never would have thought of a war like that before, but that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've tried a lot of the different acorn species and oak species, and they have different flavors. Supposedly the scrub oak doesn't taste so good. The black oak is, from what I've heard, is the tastiest, but you have to leach them. And we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, there's always, even individual trees will be better in certain species. So yeah, it's
Probably
not
depends-
easy to share.
I'm sorry, it probably depends on the soil they're in and the nutrients for that, and
Exactly.
just like grapes, just
Right.
like any.
Everyone has their favorite grape varietal. So yeah, so the title of this talk is Acorns as a Staple Food, and Beatrice Chassé, who's the head of the International Oak Society, she has an arboretum in central France, in Ouyoulé, France, and she has over 300 species, so that's 70% of all the oak species in the world in her arboretum. She says, if we consider that difficult times have been the rule rather than the exception throughout ancient and recent human history, especially regarding the frequency of war, the collapse of civilizations, and general upheaval, then perhaps acorns were a staple resource precisely because they were a famine food. So because of our fraught history, it's been something that we could always rely on. And what is a staple food or a staple crop? It's basically a food that's eaten routinely and makes up a big part of our diet. So for me, it's sugar, but for other people, it's going to be different things. And then you can focus in more on protein, carbs, and fat. Yeah, now we're going to talk a little bit about what are the modern Bolano cultures, or the modern, who's eating acorns today? I am, but there are also different places around the world. In southern Baja, there's, they're making porridges. It's eaten ceremonially in California now, mostly. In southern Arizona, in the Iberian Peninsula, they're eaten and fed to pigs. They're also making flour out of them. I have a bag of it there if you want to take a look. All over, in Greece, in the Middle East, in China, in Japan, they make noodles out of them. In Korea, they make a jelly out of it. So it's still being used, but it's being overlooked by things that are easier to produce and easier to eat. John Muir famously said that acorn food is the most strength-giving food. He used to walk into the Sierras with nothing but bread and tea. And then when I found out it was acorn bread, it made more sense to me. Because it's very filling if you've never eaten it before. So how do you eat an acorn? Well, if you've ever tried to eat an acorn just off of a tree, you've probably been very discouraged. Because, yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work here. In fact, there are species and varietals, just like you have your favorite, Cabernet Sauvignon. There is an oak tree out there that has sweet acorns. It's just a question of finding it. But if it doesn't have sweet acorns, which are all of the oak species of California, you have to follow this process. So you harvest them, you dry them out or cure them, you hull them, take off the hard outer shell, leach them. You have to, depending upon the oak species, it'll take anywhere from a week and a half to 5 days. And you fill up a jar, you mash them a little, fill up a jar with water, wait till it gets dark, pour out the water, pour in new water, wait till that gets dark. And you do that over time until the water is clear. And your tannins are water soluble, so you get them out of the acorn mash, and then you can eat it. Then you dry it out, mill it, cook it, and enjoy it, finally. Are they good for you? Yes.
What tool do you use to de-hull?
I've used a hammer, I've used a rock. Yeah, you can use all kinds of stuff. Really, you just need a hard surface and another hard surface. But there are machines to do this industrially. So I'm hoping in the future that they'll be more used. Yeah, basically acorns have the nutrition of brown rice. Brown rice is good for you. so acorns are good for you. They have phytonutrients in them, so they're also high in antioxidants. They're good at getting rid of free radicals, and they have vitamin C, which is not on this, but that's just from memory. So yeah, they're really nutritious. Yeah.
Can you purchase acorn flour
Yes.
locally?
On
Sometime?
Amazon, you can purchase it. Locally, you can find it. It's a lot harder to find, but I'd be happy to talk with you later if you wanna. If you're interested in buying some, I can tell you some where I found it.
Is it usually at health food stores?
No,
Mm.
no, you have to find it online. It's a really rare food stuff. I mean, it's everywhere, but no one, processes it. But we'll be able to try some if you've never eaten it before. I know that's what everyone's excited about. And now I'm gonna take you to a few different places where people are eating acorns now. And what I want you to pay attention to is just how pretty it is. We don't think of these trees as fruit trees, but they are, So this is the island of Kea. It's about a 2-hour boat ride from Athens to the southeast. And there's a Californian woman who lives there now, and she started this great acorn food business. There's her book over there in blue if you want to check it out. You can buy acorn flour from her online. That's a little pricey, but they're all a little pricey. So
And that would be local to Kea, that she would be.
yes,
her
no,
own-
these
her own
exactly.
acorn.
Yeah. This is the oak tree of Kea. It's called the Valonia oak. Look at that acorn
Wow.
cap. It's beautiful. It's
Flower.
I can't remember what section it is, if it's the Verentes, but it's technically not a white or a red or a golden, it's another one. It's another section. It's deciduous, it can get to 80 feet tall.
Does that need leaching if you want?
It does need leaching, but it's very tasty. And there's just, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So she's not only creating a delicious foodstuff, but she's also protecting an oak forest. Sorry. And here's just one of the recipes of her book. She's got a bunch of them, and you can check out the book here at the library. But it's there's three French speakers in the audience, so hopefully I pronounced this properly. But it's Racao des Arabes, and it's basically just like a kind of a hot chocolate. It's cocoa powder, acorn flour, and sugar. And it was eaten a lot about 100 years ago. Now there are not as many people eating acorn flour, but it's a nice afternoon snack. California, that's in the Laguna Mountains east of San Diego, and that's a black oak in its fall color. We have the coast live oak. These are some examples of its bark, what it looks like. It doesn't actually get that tall, it only gets to about 60 feet tall. And it's got, has lots of acorns on it, they always do. Although I should mention that oak trees they mast, so they don't produce every year. It's an ecological adaptation to basically outnumber the rodent population. So they'll have several years with no fruit, and then all of a sudden they'll have one giant crop. And then there aren't enough mice out there to eat all of the acorns and squirrels. And so some of them can survive and sprout. That's kind of this adaptation that they have. And then there's also the black oak. These are just some pictures of it. That's in the Yosemite Valley. Really nice, big, delicious acorn. Also needs to be leached. And the community that I chose was the Kumeyaay. They are just one of many that are eating traditionally acorn food, but they were had the most information online. And they made a shawi, which is an acorn porridge, so kind of like an oatmeal. And you basically just take your leached acorn flour, you put it in one of these beautifully woven baskets that's made from a tule rush. It swells up and becomes watertight. And then you take you heat a soapstone in a fire, and you put it into the basket and move it around so it doesn't burn the basket, and it cooks the porridge. And it's served with venison jerky, and that was kind of the breakfast around here for a long time. There's an image of shawi. And this is actually a picture from Olone Cafe in Berkeley. And if you want to try real California cuisine, I really recommend checking them out. The Zagros Mountains of Iran. We just got a few more, and then we'll wrap up here. So this is kind of a Mediterranean climate. It's this is actually where, you know, people think that humans emerged from and began to create civilization. And people to this day are still eating acorns and as a staple. It's a pretty impoverished area, so I think that definitely plays a role. But the oak trees are everywhere. So there are two main oak trees there. There's the Persian oak. They don't get very tall. They're about 40 feet tall at the highest, and they're deciduous. They're very pretty. And there's the Aleppo oak, and that is an image of of a gall on the Aleppo oak that was used to create ink, and that was the #1 source of ink before synthetic inks.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a very important species.
Isn't it a black ink or
A black ink. Yeah.
And is it, what is a gall?
A gall? Well, I know John can speak to this better than me, but basically, an oak gall is an immune response of the oak tree when it's being attacked by a wasp. And so what it does is it creates this basically growth that then the wasp lives in and plays out its reproductive cycle and you know, continues on. And so you'll see them on the coast live oaks. They're like tan colored, and they get about this big. On the valley oaks, they're red, so they're pretty cool. I don't know if you've ever gone through, you know, you see them all over the place in the interior valleys. But yeah, it's just one of the, what was it, 5,000 arthropods that are call oak trees their home.
So the ink from the oak trees was used, it had worldwide distribution. Wherever there are oaks, they made ink.
Yeah. Yeah, and wherever they didn't have oaks, it was even more valuable.
So I can see why they were coveted, because then you're basically in control of where things are being printed.
Yep. Yeah. So
That was the internet at the time.
yeah,
You know?
it's much better that we have synthetic dyes. Everyone can write stuff down.
Do those need bleaching, the two that were in Iran?
Oh, so far all of these need leaching.
Okay.
Yeah. Really, there are very few that don't need bleaching. Yeah. So those are the two species. And there's some really great YouTube videos of these communities in the mountains in all their traditional ways. Yeah.
When you say need leaching,
Yeah.
does that mean that it just tastes better, or does it mean that it's harmful to consume the tannins?
It's harmful to consume tannins. Yeah. We like just a little bit in our wine, and in fact, it's good for you. Just dose is very important in general, right? So yeah, just a little bit is actually good for you. It's an alkaloid, it's a phytochemical that's good for your nutrition. Too much of it, it becomes an anti-nutrient, and actually what it does is it leaches from you. I don't know how to explain it, but basically it saps nutrients from your body because of the process because of the tannins reacting to the chemicals in your body. So long-term eating of high tannin acorns will actually make you weaker. Yeah, so you need to leach them. Yes.
Like
Shouldn't you-
drinking too much, soda, same thing.
Right.
Like when you drink, like people drink a lot of Coca-Cola,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Not me.
No, not you, not you.
Yeah,
Shouldn't
right.
we leach walnuts then? They're pretty tannic, yeah.
They are tannic, yeah. I don't know what the levels of tannins are in walnuts, but they're not as high as acorns, because you can eat them.
I think there's different types of tannins too.
Right,
Oh.
right, yeah.
When you're
and
milling
that-
walnut, it's like poison
Yeah.
oak.
Right,
Hmm.
yeah. There's
Oh.
a lot I don't know.
It's like poison oak and
Yeah,
walnut.
yeah,
Oh,
it's,
really?
you know, I guess the answer is like, here we are, 13,000 years later, or hundreds of thousands of years later, and we have to thank all of our ancestors because they tried out all this stuff.
Somebody was a guinea pig somewhere.
We know what to eat now. Because, for a long time, it wasn't like that. There's a brother and sister harvesting this tree with a mule in the mountains of Iran. It's really an amazing video. I totally recommend you checking them out just to see how people are living out there. And I just took these screenshots from these videos, but they harvest the acorns and then they have this flat stone that they will mill the acorns on. They hot leach them, so they just pour boiling water over them and ferment them, separate the mash, do a cold leach, then they dry them on the rooftop, and then they eventually will rehydrate it and make flatbreads and serve it with goat yogurt. And it's called nane balu. If you've ever heard of naan bread, there are some roots to that name, and I think, and this, and then balu in Spanish, acorn is bellota, and so there's another deep root there of the word acorn with that word. But yeah, that's another food. The Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain. This is the fabled black-footed pig. The Spanish famously call them an olive with hooves. They're healthy. This is the cork oak, if you've ever seen it. They're really cool. Cork is just super useful. It's an evergreen oak. Portugal and Spain are just like California, so it's pretty cool to see what looks like the exact same climate. And they just have this really thick bark that's super useful, and they have acorns that are low tannin. They're not no tannin, but they're quite low. And
Is that a decorked picture?
that, correct, yeah, so that's, they've actually taken the cork all the way down past the cambium. So I think generally when they do that, they'll then cut down the tree and use it for firewood and stuff. But they'll also cut it to a shorter level, but they won't give it a buzz cut. They'll just give it like a high and tight. That's like a buzz. And they harvest them, I think, every 10 to 15 years. And if you harvest them, if you harvest the cork and not all the way down to the heartwood, then the tree stays standing, and you can harvest it for generations, 150, 200 years. Yeah, so it's what conservationists like to call a non-timber forest product.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So you can keep the trees standing and still get a lot from them. And then my favorite, the sweet acorn oak. There's a long story of humans inhabiting the Iberian Peninsula, creating this oak savanna, oak woodland ecosystem where they've slowly domesticated this pig, selected for the sweetest acorn oaks, and the product of that, over 7,000 years of living in this area, is our oak trees that mostly have acorns without tannins. So it's kind of amazing.
And that's what the pigs eat, right?
And that's what the pigs eat, but the pigs will eat all acorns.
Oh,
The pigs don't, they don't seem to care.
oh, really?
Pretty much eat anything.
And they don't die from the tannin?
No,
Oh.
no, but they will selectively eat the sweetest ones.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what, you know, historically,
Yeah.
people that stewarded the land there, they probably followed the pigs. Said, oh, that's a good one. Yeah, this is a picture of the catkin of the oak tree. It's male pollen flowers, and every spring they'll put out their catkins, and then they're wind pollinated, and they'll land on the female flower, which is like in the kind of nodes right here, and they'll pollinate, and an acorn will be born. Yes.
Well, that picture up at the right,
Yeah.
reminds me of, as you head out 58 in Santa Margarita, there's a lot of oaks there.
Right.
And that looks like maybe it's been mowed or something, but up there, they're not.
Uh-huh.
It's not mowed, it's maybe grazed, I don't know, but anyway, as it dries down, you see really lush growth underneath the oaks, but not in the open.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Shade.
Shade?
Shade.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, there used to be a lot more oak trees on the landscape, and we're gonna get there in a second, but, you know, there could definitely be a lot more, and, grass, you know, well, the cows like the shade, everyone likes the shade, right? The grass likes the shade, so, it's just, a nice, shaded area that
Naturally
things do
so.
better in. Yeah. That's how you eat acorns in Spain. Yeah, it's, they're really good. You know, you can eat acorn flour too, and in fact, they make acorn flour in Spain, but mostly they turn them into pigs. Yeah, so pigs are raised, in the early spring, and then once they get big enough, they're released into the dehesa, which is the oak woodland, and then they are out and they're chomping on all the acorns, and then the acorns are finally gone, and then they come back and they slaughter them, and yeah, that's the Spanish way.
I have a question.
Sure.
That was my love language right there. So we're
Yeah.
talking about acorns, we're talking about pigs.
Yeah,
What about truffles?
truffles, that's right,
The part of the so
yeah,
oaks, truffles?
correct,
Okay,
Yeah.
pigs, oaks, truffles,
Why is oaks-
California?
yes,
Do you have truffles under our coastline oaks?
no.
Should
but
I
we-
start digging?
But
No.
we have, but there are people, over the hill in Templeton and in Tascadero that are trying to, and successfully growing truffles. And they're inoculating the roots of these oaks. And, they've had some success, it's the black truffle. But, I can't stress enough the value of the dehesa. The dehesa is the oak savanna, oak woodland. It's super biodiverse, working land. So you get wildlife and hunting, you get herbs and plants, you have area to have agriculture. There are oaks and acorns, you can graze, so it's just this super diverse silvopasture, so partially wild, partially pastured, partial agriculture, agri-silvopasture. It's this really diverse, productive, and biodiverse style of managing land, and California could take some notes there. But in general, it's something that when we talk about, you know, the future of the planet and climate change, it's a great way to approach the future of agriculture.
Do you know, just back to this, do you
Yeah.
know what kind of an acorn it is that the black-footed pigs go for? 'Cause I'm sure it really affects the flavor of the.
There's a
very
bunch.
treasured Siberian ham.
There's, Quercus vaginea, there are a ton of different species of oaks in the Mediterranean, a ton. But they prefer the sweet ones. So the sweet acorn and the cork acorn, but then there's also, I don't actually know all their common names. It's Quercus coccifera, there's Quercus vaginea, so there's a bunch of different ones, and they'll eat them all. Yeah, so generally what they do with the Iberian ham, and there's someone up north actually doing this in California, around Clear Lake, but they'll just have a percentage, so they'll have like 100% bellota, 100% acorn pigs, and then they'll have 75%. So, even the little guy can get in and try. But pigs will eat anything. That's why they're so great. Yeah.
Is the dance at a certain elevation?
It's, yes, it's sea level up to, I don't know how high, but as it starts to get more mountainous, then there's more moisture and the trees get closer together and it turns more into a forest. Yeah. And here is an image of Korea. This is around a national park around Seoul, and they have a lot of oak species there. The ones that they use are the Quercus acutissima, sawtooth oak, beautiful acorn cap and big sharp toothed leaves, gets about 100 feet tall, and the Quercus mongolica, that was the one that was mentioned in the agriculture text in 600 in the Common Era. Those get to 100 feet tall as well, and they have beautiful fall color.
In the Chinese character for acorn has, the part of it is elephant.
Right.
Part of that character is elephant.
Right.
These
What's
are-
the other part?
I have to check, maybe tree?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's, there's a long history of humans thinking that oaks are cool and strong, and so it shows up in a lot of stuff. And, so Dotori muck is the name of this acorn jelly, and, you use the starch instead of the, flour itself. So there are ways to process the acorns to separate the starch. I don't exactly know, but once you get the acorn starch, then you just mix it with water in a 4-to-1 ratio. You cook it down in a pan, and then you pour it into a mold. And Garrett will be able to say more about that. And then you have this beautiful brown jelly that you can spice, kind of like a tofu. Yeah, nothing. Okay.
So, here in California, oak trees are drought deciduous.
Yes.
That's an important adaptation, I would think, given our weather patterns. Now, is that historical, or is it something that you think's come on recently?
Well, from my understanding, and it's not that profound, but not that comprehensive, we've had a long history of drought and deluge. So I think with climate disruption, it's gonna be drier and wetter. But in general, California has had these cycles. And so because of that, the trees have adapted to, less water, years without a lot of water, and then big years. And I think, the state of California oaks we're gonna get to in just a second, but they are threatened. And there are a lot of things that we can do to protect them. So now that we know all this about oaks and acorns, what do we do with all this knowledge? Well, since the beginning, right, we've lost 1/3 of our oak woodlands and forests. And there's, some history of the charcoal industry. There are, wild boars and invasive species. There's grazing. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, right? It's all the use, not necessarily the the animal or whatever. Agriculture and suburban sprawl and urban sprawl have taken a lot of space, and so. And according to the California Oak Foundation, we're gonna lose another 750,000 acres. We have about, I think it's 5 million acres of oak woodlands and forests in California, so it's not nothing. But that's a big chunk. That's almost 20%. So we need to be protecting these spaces because they're really valuable, obviously to wildlife, but also to us because they have a delicious food, which we're gonna try in a second.
Jesse, what kind of
Yeah.
density of trees do you need for it to be considered a woodland?
Yeah, it's about, so basically it's 0 to 25% canopy cover is a savanna,
Okay.
25 to 50% is a woodland, and then above 50% is a forest. Right, so you just think about the canopy covering the floor. So yeah, woodland is 25 to 50% cover. These are some images of erosion in the Midwest where there are oaks all over the place. In fact, the epicenter for oak diversity is actually in the south. It's around Tennessee and Alabama. But, corn crops and tilling, I mean, this is the difference in erosion over time, from, just continuous. You lose about, on a 16% slope, you'll lose 89 tons of soil per acre per year. In Missouri, on a 4% slope, you lose 20. So you're losing, I think it's about like a centimeter a year per acre in tilled agriculture, annual agriculture. But with an oak forest, which is a perennial agriculture, so it's something that you don't have to replant every year, the soil loss is pretty much nothing, right? So how do we adapt our agriculture so that we're holding on to the soil, and we're also reversing climate change? You may have heard of Project Drawdown. It's basically the private, I should have brought that book. It's basically the private sector's approach to fighting climate change. And they came up with all of these different activities that we can do to reverse climate change. Number one is reducing refrigerant use. So, air conditioning and refrigerators and all this stuff is one of the biggest culprits of climate change. But, there's also wind farms are really important, educating women around the world. And then these are by no means a small part of this approach to fighting climate change. So multi-strata agroforestry, which basically just means growing, several layers of things. You may have heard of a food forest, so you'll have your oak tree way up top, and then near it you'll have a persimmon, and then under a persimmon you'll have an elderberry, and then you'll have a vine climbing up through that. So being more productive with less land, and then also incorporating livestock into forests and woodlands, and also adding trees back into these areas where we're grazing. And those are really important ways to suck CO2 out of the air, bring it back down into the earth, and stop runaway climate change. So we can capture 1 billion tons of CO2, that's a gigaton, in our woodlands and forests by the end of the century. We can do it while producing a nutritious staple food, and there are people around the world that are making this a food source. And we're gonna continue to have, habitat for wildlife, for grazers to rest under, for us to rest under when we're walking through the savannah. So we really have an opportunity to use funding for climate policies, for like the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of funding to you know, tackle some of these issues so we could replant these forests, and produce food. And that's all. Thanks very much. Here are some of my sources. If you want to know more, I'm happy to direct you to all of them. And that's it. Now I'll take some questions and we can start eating. Yeah.
I don't wanna go back
Manya?
to eating, but,
Yeah.
the all-important question,
Yeah.
when do we harvest, and how do we harvest these acorns? Are they on the ground and we pick them up? Do we go and take them from trees?
Great
What time of
question.
year?
Yeah. Well,
Around your birthday.
Okay.
yeah. Well, yeah,
Make them think.
so we're,
Fall.
at Traceland, we're gonna be doing an acorn food workshop. So, we'll be processing the acorns, we'll be, cooking something up, and we'll show you the leaching, we'll give you the full workshop, but, yeah, acorns are, mature in October and November. Basically basically fall, winter. And you can pick them up off the ground or from a tree, and you can follow the steps that I showed earlier, and eat them.
How can I
Yeah.
tell it's matured when it's on the tree?
You can actually pick it green. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and in this book, Eating Acorns, it also gives you, the rundown on how to do it. But it's pretty straightforward. You can pick them green, you can pick them up off the ground. Some of them are gonna have weevils in them.
Yes.
Let's see, where
How
are
do
they?
you deal with those?
Well, you can eat them.
Protein.
If you think about it, it's, yeah, so this is the green
Acorn
acorn.
woodpeckers like the weevils.
Yeah, you can pick
They
it,
will
you can pick
store
it
them in
green and
tree
then cure
trunks,
it.
and then go back later on and eat the weevils out.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
But it
Yeah.
feels like there's no germ anymore, it feels like it eats the.
I don't know, sometimes the acorn is still viable actually to grow, and sometimes it's not. It kinda just depends where the weevil is. But yeah, in this book, she says, Marcy says that she'll store all the acorns, and then she'll open up the storage, and there'll just be like an exodus of little weevils like walking around, and she'll just scoop them up and put them in a pan with butter.
Oh.
They're really good. They're nutritious. I know. I'm already trying to get you guys to eat acorns, and now I won't push them.
So
They are edible.
So when the squirrels go after them, are they already mature? Like, would the animals not touch the non-matured acorns? That was a lot of negatives.
Yeah, yeah,
Do they
yeah.
only eat the mature acorns, or?
I don't know. I would think that they would pick the ones that taste the best. I don't know if they're mature or not.
You get a squirrel spy
It's a
cam.
good question.
Right. Yeah.
We'll have to observe that.
So I guess it's before winter, before they hibernate, so it must be like the right time.
Yeah,
Or do they
and
just
the
harvest them?
ground squirrels aren't, I mean, they eat them, but not that many, so, and we don't have too many tree squirrels around here, but maybe if we plant more oak trees, we'll have more tree squirrels, and then we'll be able to find out. Yeah. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
How long does a tree have to grow before it has acorns?
Sometime. Yeah, it's about
100 years.
10 to 15 years. Although we've planted oak trees and after 8 years have produced. So, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. However, if you're familiar with grafting, which is another workshop that we do, you can actually graft an oak tree so that it produces much earlier, just like a fruit tree or an avocado or anything. So a grafted tree will produce, I don't know, I think in like 5 to 8 years, and a seedling will produce in like 10 to 12.
What do you graft them onto?
You graft them onto a seedling. So you grow up an acorn, and then you take a mature branch, you cut it, you cut the what they call the budwood, and you graft it onto the seedling, wrap it up, keep it safe, and then it starts pushing from the mature tissue. And then that'll eventually take over and produce. And,
But you
yeah.
use a, oak root?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you could potentially, for your area, you could potentially like graft multiple species for your area onto that seedling.
Yes.
To see what you,
Oh, yeah.
what you get.
Yeah. It's not easy. Grafting hardwood is not easy to do, but there are people doing it. There are people doing it in Spain, and yeah, it's about time we started doing it here.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I may have missed it at the beginning, but how did you really focus in on oaks at the beginning?
Oh, I didn't say that. Yeah, why did I pick oaks?
Oaks picked you.
Yeah, I don't know, I've just, I think the semi-short answer is that I've always been looking for a perennial, staple food. Because the issue now is that we have annual agriculture and it erodes a lot of the soil. But if you have a balanced carbohydrate, like a rice, but you can grow it on a tree, so like a chestnut, right? Then you don't have to till. Not only that, but then this tree is also capturing carbon. So for a long time I've been looking for what is this tree? What is this plant that's gonna do it? And it's been above my head the whole time. You know? And so, yeah, I guess it just took me a while to find it, but yeah, it really is, it's a great opportunity because, they're already there, people already know them, and it's really just about connecting the dots. And now, if you'd like, we can try some.
Okay.
What do you say? And that concludes the presentation, so thanks so much. Sure. Yeah, and I'll let actually Garrett speak really quickly. This is my friend and local chef.
Yeah, I've started a little business called Sichuan Kitchen Slow. I lived in China for a while. My fiance is from Sichuan, China. And I do private dinners. I'm starting to take out every week and every Monday in Slow. And Jesse's been a friend for a while now, and kind of turned me on to Acorn flour. I try to use as much local food as I can, and things that are like Asian and local or adaptable here is kind of the epitome of what the ingredients I like to use. So I've been using acorn jelly in some of the pop-ups and things I've done. So in China, it's actually, they usually use like a mung bean starch or some other starch, but in Korea, as Jesse showed, they use the acorn starch to make this jelly. So I've just been using that and putting my own Sichuan spices on it. And yeah, so it's got a little chili sauce. It's pretty mild spice level, but a little soy sauce, vinegar, and then just kind of make a nice salad with the acorn jelly.
Is there someplace you can buy little acorn, oak tree seedlings like that
Yes.
locally?
If you go to Los Osos, if you go over to Los Osos, you'll see them lined up on people's walkways. Yeah, in pots already. Trying to get rid of them.
No, I can't compete with that.
But yours is good.
Yeah. No, this is grown in a tree pot. And so, generally what happens in a nursery is a tree, oaks have a taproot that they send way down. And if you put it in a pot with a plastic bottom, the taproot will go down and it'll continue to search for water and it'll just wind and wind and wind. So what these do is they're air pruning. And so it'll send the taproot down, it'll hit the air and it naturally prunes itself. Because roots know when they touch air, like, I'm going the wrong way. So then they'll self-prune and they'll send out lateral roots. So that's what you're looking for. You can see all these kind of lateral roots. That's a good sign. Yeah, but I don't discourage, mostly an acorn in a pot will do just fine if it's not in there for like too long. And when you pull it out of the pot, you can look and see if, the root is wrapped around or if it's in good shape. But yeah, we're gonna be selling these, so if you're interested.
How many years before you got to that?
Oh.
They're not fast growing,
No, in fact, that's only, like 5 months.
oh, that's only
Yeah.
5
Yeah.
months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're,
But he's got
they're
the
a
green
total
thumb.
pest
so-
in my garden,
Yeah.
I tell you.
We
So,
have some
uh,
seedlings against the wall out
Really
here
hard to
that
get
are just maybe a month and a half.
Yeah.
They're about this tall.
They
Yeah.
grow fast in the beginning, and then, yeah, for perennials, they say they sleep, they creep, and then they leap. So it'll start, and it'll be good, and then it's not gonna do anything for a long time. And then it's gonna start creeping, and then all of a sudden, once it gets a lot of roots in the ground, then it'll really take off. But yeah, they're pretty slow growing. So what do you say if we move the chairs out of the way, we bring this into the center, and we all dig in?
Okay.
All right.
Tu veux couper ton enregistrement?
Yes, isn't it?